From Code to the Cloud cuts through the noise to get to what really matters, the insights and tactics that help you maintain a consistently secure and productive DevOps strategy.
Welcome to From Code to Cloud, a DevSecOps podcast focused on Salesforce ecosystem. I'm Justin Hazard, Deputy CISO at AutoRabbit. My guest today is Chris Peifer of Attain Partners. Welcome, Chris.
Thanks, Justin. Glad to be here.
Before we get started, let's learn a little bit more about our guests. Chris, can you share something that's interesting about yourself that we couldn't find on LinkedIn?
You couldn't find on LinkedIn. When I was between middle school and high school, I built a canoe with my father. And I really appreciate woodworking as a counterpoint to all of the crazy that is day-to-day consulting life.
Okay, I have a quick question. Did you do the old Native American style where you took a trunk down and burned it out, or did you do like paneled?
It was actually cedar strips. So it has these like 1.5 inch strips of cedar. And then you put it up on a frame, you carve it smooth, cover it with fiberglass and epoxy resin. It's like an 18-foot canoe, still use it today, hanging in my garage. And was far more useful than anything I was going to do at the end of middle school. So I'm very glad to have it.
That's a fair point. That's probably the most interesting fact that I've learned thus far. So,
That's good.
kudos to you. That's pretty awesome. I'm excited to talk to you. We got a chance to talk last week and get to know each other a little bit. But I think your breadth of experience and depth of experience over the last 16-ish years in Salesforce is going to be a really interesting conversation. So without much further ado, let's jump right into it. So as a consultant, you get to see a wide array of different environments. You get to see the big, the small, the in-between, nonprofit. And you also get to see different budget sizes, constraints because of regulations, and modes of operating, because we all know that every organization operates in a different realm. One of the things that I'm wondering, as you build out these solutions and tailor it specifically for your customers, how do you go about working security teams and security into those solutions and advising your customers in ensuring that they're doing the right things?
Sure. So this type of thing, it's got to always start with fundamentals. It's got to start with risk profile, with threat assessment, with like, who is this organization? What's the sensitivity of the data that they're working with? Who wants to get in? And how motivated are they? So, you always have to be striking a balance between ease of use, between and an appropriate set of regulatory or appropriate set of controls that are going to ensure that the system isn't easily compromised. So, that Salesforce is weird and great when it comes from an AppSec point of view. You've got a really solid foundation, far more solid than most organizations start with. But then there are these holes that sit out there that are often the source of problems. So really a key role as a consultant for me is figuring out what's the right set of controls to apply for each of the common weaknesses or common challenges that you have when you implement Salesforce. So, some of that is going to be real basic stuff, like you need to make sure you have a mechanism and a process that's necessary, to ensure field level, object level security is properly being enforced. It's so easy to miss a checkbox. And in some cases, that can have catastrophic security implications, especially if you're configuring the guest user, you accidentally check that read all, and suddenly you exposed your entire account data set to the world. And what's interesting is that, I often play a role of doing a security review of proposed configuration. It can be so easy to just sort of, what is it? The path to hell is paved with good intentions. And so you're thinking, okay, well, we've got this, we need to have this widget that allows you to search for a subset of accounts. and make sure that the guest user can do that. And so then you're like, oh, we're having an access control problem. Great, let's just grant access to all of them.
And then you never work backwards to find out where
Exactly.
that problem.
Oh, it
Yep.
works. It works. So, and this is also where, like that, in my mind, that's an unacceptable configuration no matter what. There are a bunch of different strategies or alternatives we can take that would bypass that particular configuration problem. But again, like, it should be really, really built around what's the risk profile of the organization and who wants to get in. So if you're talking about a small nonprofit that isn't on the radar of a lot of folks, you're really, meat and potato stuff. Make sure that you've got, good solid passwords. Make sure that you've got, in fact, I think simplicity is critical in your implementation, making sure that the client actually understands what they have, and in a way that they're not going to accidentally check their own checkbox. And then that scales, of course. So when you get to, we at Attain Partners, we tend to work with enterprise scale in the nonprofit higher ed sector, Ivy League universities, organizations that actually do have a pretty big target on their back.
Yeah.
And so, in that setting, you actually have to have some proactive activities, just a simple Python script that runs through all the Salesforce IDs that are typically, the Salesforce ID namespace, I guess would be the way that I would describe it, that hits the org and checks to see, is there any object that's publicly exposed? You can have that run nightly, and suddenly you've got an alert saying, oh, hey, somebody's done something wrong. So that, I mean, I don't know, that's sort of, some of the common things that we do. And it is really critical that you don't go too far with smaller organizations, and you go far enough with larger organizations.
I mean, that makes sense. I've worked in both very small shops and very large shops. So, every small shop wants to do what the large shop's doing. They're just not ready for it yet, because there is a level of agility that you still need when you're still small. So, I completely understand that. I completely get it. I felt that at my core way too many times. Are you seeing? Are you seeing? So this is just my experience, and I'm
Sure,
interested to see what you're seeing. Is for the most part, for the early part of the 2010s, starting to lead into the early part of the 2020s, security teams in Salesforce were pretty much hands off. But what I'm really starting to see, of course, over the last year or so, is security teams are starting to go, what is Salesforce and what do we have there? Are you
Exactly.
starting to see that, or is it
Yeah.
been like a ramp up, or has it always been there for you before?
So it's interesting. We are seeing more engagement from security teams. In particular, it used to be, and it's often that, like, we as the consulting partner are like, hey, we want to be engaged with you. We want to be working with your security team, because the security team is ultimately responsible for compliance after we hand off the solution. So they've got to be in the weeds, and it is really easy when, in a pre-sales process, we get a checklist of, does your solution do the following? And you can just say, yes, Salesforce does all these things. Okay, we're deploying Shield. It's got encryption at rest. We're, all, and not have a critical conversation of, well, it does these things, but we can misconfigure it, or you can misconfigure it so that data is vulnerable. Oh, you've bought Shield. Great. Have you enabled field level encryption on anything? The number of orgs that we've seen coming in after another partner, another vendor, or the client implemented, and they bought Shield, it checked an encryption checkbox, and nobody ever actually went in and encrypted the data on individual fields. It's unfortunate, and it's sad. Now, of all of the risk profile, the likelihood of Salesforce infrastructure breach is far lower than, say, misconfiguration, or an add-on app that's a problem, or all those other things. But still, like, you bought the product, you're not really able to check the checkbox of compliance unless you've done the configuration steps that are necessary.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's the biggest, I would say, I want to say misnomer,
Mhm.
but
Mhm.
misnomer, right? Like,
Yeah,
is
yeah.
that, oh, I've got Salesforce, I'm secure. It was the exact same thought with AWS in the
Yeah.
mid 2010s and everything else like that. That shared responsibility model is huge.
Yes.
And you know, I've talked to a few of our customers, and I've specifically said, I was like, think about it like a Coke bottle. Um, the infrastructure for Salesforce is the bottle itself, and they filled up the liquid and everything else like that. You're not getting into that pretty in any easy way. Like nation states can try,
Yeah.
and script kiddies can try. It's going to be difficult. Like they've got a pretty good security operation over there,
Yeah.
but there is that hole at the top. That hole at the top is yours, and it's all of your configurations. You can tighten it and flip it over and see if any liquid drops out. And you can tighten it a little bit more and a little bit more. There's this, and it's always been the case with security, or at least from the security perspective, is you've got um, business operations and you've got security, and you
Mhm.
don't hinder business operations. So what do? You try and figure out what that happy medium is between the two. I mean, that's the world that I live in.
Yeah, yeah.
My chief product officer is like, hey, I want to do this one thing, and I'm like, do you know what kind of risk that exposes? All right, we'll
Yep.
do that thing, but we're gonna do X, Y, and Z before we do that particular thing. So, um, understanding, and I think a lot of I don't want to say confusion, because confusion's not the right word. A lot of the misunderstanding from security teams is
Yeah.
that's where it's at. And one of our VPs of product, he and I were talking a while back, shortly after I got here. I was like, I need you to understand something. Salesforce is not new. And the problems that Salesforce has for their customers have. I don't want to say Salesforce. Let me correct myself.
Yeah, yeah. It's really
But
about security. Yeah.
the problem that Salesforce customers have, they're identical to the exact same problems that we have had in the security industry for other things. Permission sets are a prime example. I keep using Active Directory and all
Yeah.
of the things that we
Same
went through
story.
with groups and permissions and inheritance and all of those
Yeah.
things. We're seeing the exact same problem set with Salesforce today. And you were talking about the opening all or read all for like
Yeah.
guests and everything else like that. I think it has 3 buckets,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Like making them
Exactly.
publicly accessible, right? Like we've seen
Just
this
have to
issue
get zero.
before.
That's all it is.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
I'm sitting here in a situation where I continuously tell our VP of product, like, hey, what's old is new again for security teams. If you can analogize this and you can liken it to something that they've already seen, which at this point in time of the security industry, which is now about 35 years old,
Yeah.
we've seen a lot. We've seen quite a few of the things. So um, pulling those threads and pulling those things in and saying, hey, it's very similar to this. Here's where the differences are. That's where I find, like, when I'm training up security teams, that's where I find the most benefit. And it's literally just a translation layer, right? Like that's all it really is. Because
Yeah.
Salesforce,
Yeah.
just like AWS, just like Azure, just like Google Cloud or GCP, they all have their own vernacular for the exact
Exactly.
same thing.
Exactly.
Right.
And so like the security team comes in and they're asking a question that would be correct for Active Directory, and be like the Salesforce folks be like, oh well, we don't use that language, so no, that's not a problem. When in fact it is a problem. It's just with different language, and the security team doesn't know to ask. And so if you're part of a security team that's reviewing Salesforce, and the vendor that you're talking to says, oh, we're good, we don't do those things, that's a red flag. That's a big red flag, because when we do all of those things, I mean, even like, yes, Salesforce does have some nice, unique, out of the box protections for OWASP top 10 vulnerabilities. So like, yes, there's good some good stuff around SQL injection, things, but it's even still possible, like if you write bad code, if you misconfigure an app, it's just different language and a different way to think about the exact same problem. The other thing that comes to mind that I wanted to bring up, um, you know, I'm somebody who I'm a huge fan of the Phoenix Project as a book. If y'all haven't read that, it's old now. I mean, we're talking about a decade-old technology book that maybe is going out of fashion these days, but like, I mean, that book resonated with me viscerally. And there's one of the characters that is changed the most in that book is the security guy. And because he has transitioned from like, I have a massive checklist and I need to check all the check boxes, to I have a view and a role in business value. And my root view, there's an enormous contribution to overall business value that we didn't just share our entire customer account list with the world. And you know what? Like that checkbox around some obscure thing, maybe less important. So it's all about being able to focus and understand what is the business impact, and making sure that's well understood. Risk frameworks are really valuable here as well. But anybody who hasn't read that book is sort of like, I really strongly recommend folks read it, even if it's older. I think it's even more valuable today, looking at vibe coding and AI and all these other factors in the picture.
No, absolutely. And like the first of all, let me step back, because there's a little funny anecdote that I have, because it literally happened to me yesterday. That character, the security character in the Phoenix Project, one of the things that's really interesting to me is, and I'll use the analogy of yesterday. We were going through, I'm going to call her out, our senior director of project management, Kylie. She's one of my favorite people at AutoRabbit. Love her to death. But she got a little upset with me yesterday. We were having a conversation with a group of us, and the question came to me of, hey, what's the security implication of this? And I was like, it depends. And she was like, what do you mean?
It's a very
And
consulted answer, but yes.
But that's all I really am. And on a day, like if you cut through all of the things that are happening on a day in and day out basis, I consult more than I do anything, right? Like I advise on strategy, and then I implement said strategy. But the fact of the matter is like, I need the context, right?
Yeah.
So we were talking about, we were talking about Salesforce instances, and they were like, well, we're seeing that this thing has, this instance has 703 regulated fields. And I was like, okay. And they're like, does that worry you? And I was like, yeah, I mean, it worries me, but I need the context behind it. Are all of those fields populated? What's the data that's sitting in those fields? Who has access to it? All of those things. Because you could tell me we have 703 regulated fields, but only a super admin on Tuesday at 12:03 p.m. can access any one of those fields.
Proper audit controls and yeah.
And my concern level goes down a significant margin. Now, if you tell me we have 703 regulated fields, they're fully populated with credit card numbers, social security numbers, PHI, any of those types of things, and it's publicly exposed, yeah, my concern level jacks, right? Like I might be in the world of a heart attack range at that point in time. Like it puts me in a situation where like I have a significant, like, what are we doing? We need to shut this thing down immediately and reevaluate all of the things that we're doing at the exact same time. So and the thing that I've learned over 16 years in the security industry is it depends is the most relevant answer in almost every given situation. And people hate it, but then because it depends, ... What's the context? And here's the things that I'm thinking about.
Regulatory framework. What are the legal implications if we do this? Like, do we have CVVs sitting on disk? Do we have like all of these things matter enormously? And I think that like it's very easy to see something as simple. So I mean, we have a former client, actually. I'm not going to disclose a name here, but they were adamant that social security number was the unique identifier for people. Yes, yes, full social security number. And and it's one of these really interesting moments where, like, we can be as direct, we can be, we're an outside vendor. We can provide this sort of quiet sidebar, hey, this is a risk. Then you move on to the, like, public sidebar, hey, we're in a project planning meeting, this is a risk. Then we move into the escalation framework, we get into the executive sponsor, hey, this is a risk, and of course spelling out all of the implications if in fact that this data is breached. And then finally we get to the point where we basically ask for an executive level person at the organization to sign off on a piece of paper that says this is the risk and we accept it. And we agree that Attain Partners is not liable because we were fully and properly advised of the risk. And that's one of the interesting differences around being outside versus being inside at an organization. Like, occasionally we'll reach a point where we just say, we're not willing to do this. Like, you're going to have to find another vendor. Because the risk is just too high for even with that sign off. It's just this, you just shouldn't be doing this. And people are so set in their ways. And, somebody's been, well, when we had a card catalog system in the 1980s, we used social security number as a great identifier for people. And
Yeah, but somebody overseas can't touch that card catalog.
Exactly. Yeah.
Like within a matter of seconds. Like there's a drastic, like, again, it depends.
It depends.
A company I used to work at, I came in, I was their security operations manager, and our DLP system kept on going crazy. And I was like, what is going on? So I went and investigated. I asked our analyst, I was like, why do we see so many alerts for this? And they're like, you're not going to believe this. And I was like, okay, tell me. And I was like, they were like, our UUID is 9 digits. And I was like, what do you mean? And they were like, our UUIDs for all of our customers are 9 digits. So when we've got developer A sending a set of UUIDs for our customer base to developer B while they're troubleshooting something and they're trying to fix something, it's picking up on the social security number, DLP alert.
Yes.
And I went to our head of development, our head of product, and I said, you're going to hate me and I need you to do something for me.
Yeah.
And he said, what's that? And I said, I either A, need you to encrypt every single social security number in transit, not bulked. And I need it to be on a singular level, for each, what's it called?
Solid or whatever.
And he was like, why? And I was like, because we're breaking and inspecting for DLP purposes, and it won't be able to break and inspect when you hit the encryption here versus here.
Yeah.
And he was like, okay, or what's our other option? I was like, you change your entire UUID system. They changed their entire UUID system. They spent 3 months and changed their entire UUID system. And they were like, you know what? When they stepped back and they looked at it, they were like, we should make sure it's a GUID that we're using for UUID. So they went to, I think it was like 24 characters with dashes and everything else like that. Exactly. They went, because when the application was built was like, I don't know, 2008, and they had just kept the UUID system. He stopped all feature releases and had everybody work on the GUID solution, and then revamped all of the code and went back. And I think it took us like 3 to 6 months to get everything done. But the CTO signed off on it. Everybody signed off on it. And they were like, this is the smart thing to do. And I was like, oh, okay. Yeah. And then I hear somebody's using social security numbers as the user identifier. That's a first. I'll be honest with you. That's a first. And I think I would have some pretty significant problems with that. But no, that's a really interesting one. But no, I'm seeing security teams getting more and more involved. I've had a couple of buddies reach out to me that they work at organizations that have Salesforce, and when everything popped from Google over the summer last year, and every instance thereof, they're asking me, what are you doing? How do you know about this? What do you think about this? How are you thinking about it? And then I'm like translating it for them. I'm like, hey, when your Salesforce dev is saying this, they're like, yeah. And I was like, it means this. And they were like, oh, really? That's easy. And I was like, that's what I'm saying. My buddy and I were talking the other day, and he goes, our Salesforce devs are telling us like it's so difficult and everything else like that to work in Apex and da 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 da. And I was like, it is.
Yeah.
Like Apex is a really weird language. Like I'm gonna be very honest with you.
Yeah.
I was like, but you know what one of the most prevalent things is that we find? And he said, what's that? And I said, SOCL queries that, you could do an injection on. And he goes, what's a SOCL query? And I was like, basically SQL.
SQL.
And he goes,
Yeah.
so it's a SQL injection? I was like, yeah. I was like, this stuff will map into your AppSec pipeline without much fanfare. And he was like, are you kidding me? Like, we've been stressing over this for the last couple of months of like how we're going to handle this. I was like, you're going to have to do a little work to understand language. You're going to have to do a little work to understand vernacular.
Yeah.
But if you can do the translation, like you'll be 100% fine. I was like, permission sets are permissions and groups and inheritance and everything else like that from AD time frame. And I was like, at the same time, like you're looking at things like objects and fields. I was like, it's really no different than a database.
Yes, exactly.
Exactly. I was like,
Yeah.
there's no difference here. And he was like, oh man, this is so much easier than I thought it was going to be. And I was like, listen, when I came to AutoRabbit many, many moons ago, 16 months, I was like, I have no idea what Salesforce is. But as I started talking to people in product and some of our developers and our engineering team and our SRE team, and I got to know like what we're doing and how we're doing it, I was like, oh, this is just another day in security land for me. So
There's one thing that I want to add to that, which is, I think there is a unique. I mean, it's not unique as that like denial of service exists elsewhere, obviously in the world. But there is a unique set of challenges with the platform related to denial of service conditions because Salesforce is so aggressive on resource utilization limits. And so one of the things that we see, and this is part of what makes my job fun, um, the core platform doesn't scale in the same way as a lot of people expect. So you start getting weird performance issues when you have 10,000 child records associated with a single parent, or when you have a single user owning a huge percentage of the records in the system, like say a migration user. And one of the critical things, so in that space, architecture matters an enormous amount. And that's a place where like I wouldn't expect a standard security team to be able to look at it and say, oh, well, you've got really a data model problem here. And if you have, say, I mean, a really good example, we did a project with the Boston Marathon, 36,000 registrations coming in, 1,000 people on the registration form, 100 submissions per second. Yes. It's fun. It was a lot of fun. So one of the critical things there, and that's not a malicious scenario, but there are lots of malicious scenarios I could come up with where somebody's gone out and bought a random tool, and that can spit submissions at a form.
Yeah.
And take the whole form down. And if Salesforce is behind the scenes and it is not architected right, it absolutely will just take the whole system, at least take your inbound down. So like that's one of the pieces where I think you have to be uniquely careful, and it's a place where scale matters. We're talking to a smaller nonprofit, like it's fine. Like if you don't imagine the next 10 years you're going to be enormous, it's okay to have a model where maybe that there's a less durable architecture. And the other thing that's out there that is really interesting, and this goes way back to one of my first experiences with Salesforce, was integrating Drupal in Salesforce. And we had a Drupal-based website. I was the web director. And And I went in and I wanted to synchronize Salesforce contacts with users so we could have a Drupal-based portal. So I went ahead and kicked off a sync that was going to pull down all the contacts from our org and put them into the Drupal database as users. Great. I took our website down because whatever resources we had behind that website are nothing compared to the resources behind the Salesforce instance. And Salesforce was perfectly happy to spit data at our website so fast to take the site down.
Yeah.
So there's I think there was a unique it's obviously it's a problem that is going to seem familiar, but the way it manifests in the ecosystem is a bit unique, and you really have to be intentional from an architecture point of view, to be sure you're architecting for scale. If you're going to ever imagine scale will occur.
But your Drupal example is a very good one at that, right? Because I see a lot of people that make sure that they're architecting for scale of their Salesforce instance.
Yes.
But what are all the other mechanisms that are going to be affected?
Exactly.
How fast is that thing generating logs? How fast is it spitting those logs out? How fast is it sending them to the SIM?
When are you
Or
going
the
to
SIM
hit this
handle?
storage limits?
Exactly.
And also, like, how does it fail? What's the fail condition? Like, is it going to come down? Is it going to stop logging? Is it going to take down your entire integration stack? Like, let's model that out and be intentional about it. Like, have a modern enterprise architecture as part of this whole solution.
Absolutely. And I mean, like, the interesting thing is like, in your particular situation, in that Drupal example, that is a DDoS.
Yeah,
It absolutely 110. I was having this. I was just literally having this conversation with our devs yesterday. I was like, that is a DDoS. It just doesn't happen to be malicious, right? And security incidents kind of rise from non-malicious insider type things, activities, completely doing what they're supposed to be doing, right? Because when we think on the security side of the house, when we think about security incidents, and I had a former chief product officer that reminded me of this a couple of years ago. You look at the CIA triad: confidentiality, integrity, and availability, right? Well, your Drupal website is not available, therefore it is a security incident. So, no, that's a really interesting component, because like, security teams aren't necessarily involved in that step. Of I mean, they should be, of like, hey, what can the website handle and what can it not handle? But it's not thinking about it of like, how do I make these things work at the same level? So we need to give the website way more resources than it has right now. That's an architecture standpoint, but they should be thinking about those connections and what do those connections look like. So that's where rubber meets the road, right?
Yeah, and the critical thing with that as well is that, like, if I could do that internally by making a mistake, now thankfully it was a dev environment, all these other fun protections of depth, but if I can make a mistake and do that, somebody malicious can do it intentionally.
Absolutely.
And that's that's the critical piece. And anywhere you've got that that scale related challenges. And so, in that particular case, we decided we implemented an inbound queue that would process the queue as fast as the website could process, because day-to-day operations didn't need more. If somebody wanted to hit it really hard, the queue filled up, and the queue, the queue capacity was enormous. So, it wasn't a big deal. We just had slower sync, and that was the business risk that the organization signed off on, to be able to handle that whole situation gracefully and keep available.
Yeah, and I think that kind of brings back to the, like, that's a good summation for this particular episode of the podcast, like, architecting mission critical Salesforce organizations, right? So like, you're looking at it, and Salesforce may be the hub in a hub and spoke type situation, but it could be feeding or pulling from all of these different spokes. And all of those different spokes may not have the resources that are required for Salesforce to interact with it in a good way. So
Exactly.
it's thinking about Salesforce, but then it's thinking about all of these other aspects and all of like the website or a SIM or your log aggregator or a ticketing queue, any of those things. Let's assume you're not using Service Cloud for a second. All of those things are subject to failure points where Salesforce, you've given Salesforce more than enough resources, but you haven't given everything else more than enough resources. So you have to think about all of those secondary and tertiary things. So I think that that's a really interesting point. And I think it's really like that is we are not seeing architecture think about it in that terms. That's my guess. I mean, you at Attain are probably thinking about all of that. Like you go in thinking about, hey, where are the connection points? How is this all happening? Are we doing this over 443? Or are we doing over 80? Like those types of questions are probably being asked as you're onboarding customers and things of that nature. But my guess is that most internal teams don't think about that, and it's because it's siloed. And that's where it scares me. Because one of the things that scares me the most is that I see Salesforce teams operating in their own little bubble of like, it's Salesforce.
We don't
Anybody else
worry about it. Security team is focused on the website and on, the ERP system or whatever else. And exactly. And then on top of that, like the fact that even the most well-meaning, experienced Salesforce admin in like 3 or 4 clicks can do something really bad from a security point of view. And, like that's a pretty unique risk profile, because in a lot of cases, like traditional AppSec world, you've got code reviews, you've got like who's reviewing that click, and what's the process to ensure that configuration. Obviously, there are tools, there are processes, like Pure AutoRabbit offers some things in this area, but like making sure that like that you've got a mature deployment pipeline that has the appropriate checks that are happening in with the right background knowledge to understand the nature of the change.
And that's one of the things that, as I've gotten further and further in my understanding of Salesforce and how people have it deployed throughout the organization and things of that nature, I'm a major component of Salesforce mapping into an enterprise risk management framework. Most medium to large size organizations have an approval board or a CCB board or whatever you want to call it, where they convene and they assess the risk to the organization, right? So that admin that's making that change, they would have to input a ticket, and then it'd have to be assessed for risk. And it's being assessed by people like IT, like security, like Salesforce. So they get a seat at the table, and they can give the information and the context behind it so that good decisions can be made, right? And as we grow and build that and mature that process, next thing you know, it's the very similar situation of IT saying security doesn't know what they're talking about, and security saying IT just wants to allow everything all the time, everywhere. And we came together and we kind of figured the thing out. So bringing Salesforce to that exact same table, giving them the seat at the table, whether that be the head of Salesforce development or whatever the case may be, to make sure that context awareness can be pulled in, and then building processes around that. I think that that's where, evolutionarily speaking, I think that that's the next step, right? And I think once you get to that realm, I think there's a fear. It's a guess. It's a whole like hypothesis.
Sure.
I think there's a fear on the Salesforce side that, oh, we're not going to be able to do the things that we've always been able to do and be able to be agile and be able to just push product and push things that we need to as quickly as possible, because security likes to slow things way down, and IT is going to make us do this or do that, where they've been in this bubble and they've just been able to operate as necessary. And the only thing that they had to worry about is, hey, we've got a new dev, we've got a new engineer, we've got a new admin, add them to SSO tiles to the IT team. Like that's the extent of what they had to worry about. In all honesty, the way that I actually see this playing out is the initial onboarding into an enterprise risk management framework and team is going to slow everything down a little bit initially until everybody gets up to speed. Give it 3
Yeah.
months, give it 6 months, something like that. And then all of a sudden, like, you're just going to see things move at a much more rapid clip. And the reason why is because now people understand and they're like, oh yeah, that makes sense. And the risk is mitigated by X, Y, and Z, and we have an understanding of the environment.
Yeah.
Wouldn't
It's like learning to ride a bike and operating within a risk framework. But there's also a piece about making sure that the risk framework is properly sort of Salesforce informed. So like, you know, so that, I mean, ideally you've got a certain category of changes that are just like auto approve and log.
Yeah.
Cause like there's adding a field that is accessible to a small, that non-sensitive data, no PII, etc. Great, add it. We need to know the fact that we did it, make sure there's a proper JIRA ticket, it's properly logged, and like that. There's no additional, once the processes are well established, there's no additional friction. But changing permission sets, changing profiles, doing anything with the guest user, like let's get 5 or 6 eyes on that.
Yeah. Yeah. What's the cascading of a profile, right? Like,
Exactly.
who else is accessing that profile, and what are you now giving them additional access to that you didn't think about, you didn't realize, and mapping that, graphing that out to understand, like, this profile is being used by these 7 different applications that you didn't know existed as a developer, and it gives access to 89.3% of the data in the Salesforce ecosystem, and you adding it to the app gives 100%. So let's not do that.
And with that, like there's the applying this same framework to inbound changes from managed packages is critical, because I've run into more than once where a managed package is pushing a change to a profile, to a permission set that's opening it up in a meaningful way.
Yeah.
And like, it's very easy to just be like, okay, we checked critical path, we installed the update, it all works, we're good.
Yeah.
And which means because these auto updates get pushed from the App Exchange, you have to have the proper review process that's synced with the App Exchange package. And the ability to throw a flag and file a ticket with the vendor if in fact changes will have a substantial negative impact on your org security.
Absolutely. That's why I'm like, put it in a lower environment and tell me what the differences are.
Yes.
Put it in a lower environment and tell me what the differences are. That's what I want to know. I want to know, oh, okay, we're updating all of these profiles. Okay. Are we giving more access, or are we restricting access with this update? Oh, we're giving more. Show me the differences. That's where I kind of live, and that's where I sit. So, I think we've had a pretty good conversation. I didn't even get to my last question, but it's completely fine. I think conversation was going really well. And I think that we covered a couple of really interesting topics. I think I'm always going to advocate for this: get security in often and early in the conversation. And I think especially in a lot of the things that you're doing, like tailoring those solutions and building out solutions and architecting, like that's going to be very, very important to have security in early and often. Think about the secondary and tertiary items and affected assets, right? Because this is a very much waterfall type situation and scenario. So you want to make sure that you're doing that as well. And then also ask the question, right? Like, it doesn't have to be of Justin, it doesn't have to be of Chris, but ask the question of somebody just to get an outside perspective.
Yeah.
I can tell you one thing that I've learned in my career is I don't know everything. I generally start every conversation with, I'm the dumb guy in the room, so that I can make sure that I'm understanding where everybody's coming from. And if I go into that perspective, with that perspective, it opens it up for the rest of everybody to give me their perspective so that I can understand where we may have friction points, as well as we may have a misunderstanding or lack of guidance. I don't go into any room going, I'm the top security guy. I know everything. I don't know everything.
Got a C in my title, therefore I win. Yeah.
Exactly. No, that's, I think a little bit of humility goes a very, very long way. I was sitting with a lot of Salesforce people yesterday, and I was like, I'm the dumb guy in the room. I don't know Salesforce's, like, we had cumulative something like 150 years of experience in Salesforce in the room. I've been at a company that deals with Salesforce for 16 months. I'm dumb by comparative, right? So, Chris, I want to thank you for such a lively conversation. I'm looking forward to partnering with you more in the future and having conversations, and you being a part of my network now. Like, I'm going to reach out to you and be like, hey, what would you do in this situation? So this has been another episode of From Code to Cloud. We will be releasing more of these informative conversations, diving deeper into different topics, looking at different scenarios in the Salesforce ecosystem. Make sure that you download us wherever you get your podcasts. You can visit us at autorabbit.com for show notes, helpful links, access to every episode as they're released. And what about Attain? Where can they reach you?
You can check us out at attainpartners.com, and feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm happy to connect and spread the network.
Perfect. Stay safe out there, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.